Welcome to the State of the Nation weekly update with me, Mike Sham. So the question that I am posing today is just how seriously should we take Mkhonto weSizwe, MK Party as they've become known? Well, I've done a little bit of further analysis, and I think we've got to take them very, very seriously. Because I have done that thing that all of you have been avoiding, and I've gone and looked through their manifesto, which has emerged after their great performance. Let's give them full credit at the 2024 election, where they were not tipped by any of the analysts, and even some of the polls said they might do well, but nobody had them anywhere near their eventual outcome, where they got 15% of the national vote, 46% of the vote in KwaZulu-Natal, and were almost single-handedly responsible for taking the ANC from their lofty heights of 57% all the way down to below 40%. It doesn't just happen by accident. It happens because people are looking for somewhere else to vote. They go, they find something that's appealing to them. And who was the person who was most appealing to them? Well, it was former President Jacob Zuma, when he put his name to the Mkhonto weSizwe brand, got rid of everybody that started the party, and everybody said, you know what we would like is round 2 of Jacob Zuma. Now, anybody with that kind of charisma, with that kind of understanding of their voting market, must be taken very seriously. So I'm taking them seriously. And to take them seriously, I think we must just have a quick look at what their policies are. Well, shortly before the election, we got their spokesperson on the State of the Nation, Tlamulo Ndlela, was here. He was explaining to us this fledgling party that was getting a lot of the headlines, what their policies were. They didn't even really have a manifesto. I think they had sort of a serviette from a restaurant where they'd jotted down a few notes. And the things that came out at that point, where the things that they were strong on was Jacob Zuma, and he must finish the work that he started. We'll come back to that in a second. Some of the major points were they hated the Constitution, wanted it removed and replaced by a parliamentary system. We'll talk more about that in a second. They're very keen on removing property rights, very keen on nationalizing everything that wasn't nailed down, and most of the stuff that was nailed down. And, there were 2 other issues that they were big on. One was giving power to traditional leaders and kings and queens throughout South Africa. We've got many. And last but by no means least, they are very keen on gutting the justice system as we know it and replacing it with African law. And as he explained it to me in that interview, it might mean that when you get stopped for speeding, you get charged 2 cows. And, I presume he was joking, but that was how they went into the election. They did really, really well. In fact, they seemed to do so well that it shocked everybody, including themselves, because they couldn't fill their seats. They didn't have a list ready. They seemed to have a problem with the people who had got them to that point. They then went on a buying spurge, a bit like one of those professional football teams that suddenly gets taken over by a very rich oligarch, and suddenly they go from bottom of the table to top of the table with a big wad of money behind them, and they can just go and spend on the biggest names that they can find. So who did MK go and recruit? Well, for starters, they seem to recruit, especially for their parliamentary team, almost everybody that was senior in the Zuma years that worked in SOEs, state-owned entities, state-owned companies. People like Brian Molefe, that was fingered in by a few judges, Zondo Commission, who was sort of the mover and shaker behind the gutting of Eskom. He was the guy, if you recall, that told the judge that the reason that he went to Saxonwold 30-something times is that there's a shebeen in Saxonwold. For those that don't know, Saxonwold is one of the top-end suburbs in Johannesburg and the place least likely to have a shebeen. You also got Siyabonga Gama, guy who was at Transnet, also fired from there. Lucky Montana, he's a guy who destroyed PRASA, ordered trains that were too big for the bridges. So a real sort of interesting blend of people that he got. All people that had been fingered in legal cases, definitely at the Zondo Commission, and all those people that Shamila Batoy and people at the National Prosecuting Authority seem to be dead scared to take to court, and every time they do, they seem to bungle the case almost on purpose. So they really did go heavy on the state capturers. And of course, led by the only judge to be impeached. In fact, there's two. The one who drove into a wall drunk and then uttered racial abuse sort of 16 years later, finally gets disbarred, impeached as a judge. The other one was John Tlhophe, who was judge president at the time, judge president in the Western Cape. And he had told people that this goes back to the early years of Jacob Zuma, to say that they should look kindly on cases where Jacob Zuma is concerned. And eventually, after an ongoing legal process, he was also impeached from his role in the judiciary, and then he pitched up as the parliamentary leader for Mkhonto weSizwe. Now, we all know this, but the big sort of move that Mkhonto weSizwe has made towards the end of the year was to go on an absolute raid of the economic freedom fighters, the EFF. It started off with the Zuma sycophant Nzwanele Manye. He was always going to go. He had headed up the Jacob Zuma Foundation, but he had been a parliamentarian for EFF. Busisiwe Mkhwebane, the disgraced, removed former public protector, who didn't seem to really care much for the public, but protected a lot of the same people we are talking about. She was in the EFF and flipped to MK. Along the way, Dolly Mpofu, the renowned legal scholar, legal mind, who doesn't seem to be good at winning law cases, but he's there always defending Jacob Zuma. And it was quite anomalous because, you had a guy who was one of the founders of the EFF, and he was constantly working as Jacob Zuma's legal counsel. And then, of course, the biggest fish of the lot was that of former EFF deputy president and co-founder Floyd Shivambu, who said, that when they said that Jacob Zuma must pay back all the money and that he's corrupt, they had been confused and blinded and hypnotized by a media that was telling lies. So with this team they've assembled, they backfilled a team that has gone to Parliament. They've also written a manifesto that's got the fingerprints, the large fingerprints of Floyd Shivambu all over this. And what is that manifesto? What does Mkhonto weSizwe stand for? Well, what you've got to do is you've got to imagine the EFF manifesto, but on steroids. And I want to read you some of the highlights, just some of the highlights, not all of them. They want to reclaim African dignity by making indigenous languages mandatory, and to eliminate all aspects of colonialism and apartheid from cultural and political life. Now, I presume that means that you can't wear Western clothing, all those Louis Vuitton clothes, handbags, etc., all those Western items, they must go back, one would imagine. And of course, all young people must do a year of military service. Reclaim land and minerals. Well, this was obvious because this has been coming, and it's even within the ANC. Expropriate all the land. The state will be the custodian of the land. This goes back to the same thing that the EFF has been espousing for ages, and that is, you won't be able to buy your land. Some government official will tell you which house you can be in, which house I can be in, and you'll put your name on a list, and that person will be hyper efficient and put you in the suburb that you want to be in. But there will be the land, and the royal traditional households will be the custodian of all land. Now, this is interesting. They say that the state will equitably distribute this land. Now, equitably is an interesting thing because there's an acre and there's an acre. There's an acre in Camps Bay that'll probably go for, 100 million rand. And then there's an acre in the Karoo where you're lucky to get 10,000 rand. So I'm not 100% sure if you equitably distribute this land by measure, by value. Not sure, but in any case, they're going to equitably distribute the land. And of course, the state will own and control all of the natural resources, including, oddly enough, the internet and energy. So I presume those solar panels that we've got will belong to the state. But anyway, this is their manifesto. Okay. Now they're going to reclaim people's power by scrapping the Constitution. Now this is a Constitution that has a Bill of Rights that protects our rights as citizens of the country. But they are going to scrap the Constitution, and they're going to reclaim people's power by having a parliamentary system. Now let me tell you about parliamentary systems. Parliamentary systems are not used in many places because it kind of inevitably leads to the same place, and South Africa has seen this movie before. When the Parliament runs the place, they are the ultimate authority. You've got no recourse. If Parliament decides that tomorrow they're going to ban all left-handed people, you can't say, hey, I'm left-handed. Please don't ban us. Parliament has decided, and that law will carry. Even if it's by 51%, it's gone, it's a law. That is how apartheid managed to become law in South Africa, because more than half of Parliament said it was a good idea. So in other words, when Parliament, they can decide anything. They can decide that, somebody decided to jump out of the 10th floor of John Vorster Square backwards tied to a chair. And you can't dispute it because Parliament has decided. Now, Parliament, of course, is run by officials, and officials are by politicians, and politicians are appointed by parties, and this can go to very deep and dark places. So, I'm not a big fan of parliamentary democracy. But anyway, they're going to reclaim the economy. But this is a nice one. They're going to set up a sovereign wealth fund, eventually going to be 30% of GDP. Now, sovereign wealth funds are fun things, okay? At its best, it's what happens in Norway when they strike oil and they decide this oil must be for the good of the Norwegian people. And they then put it in a sovereign wealth fund and then spend it on improving the country. And then you've got the sovereign wealth fund as you had in Malaysia, where they say there's a sovereign wealth fund, but the president can use it as his slush fund. He can do whatever he likes with it because it belongs to the state, and the state belongs to the president, and he can do whatever he likes. And the sovereign wealth fund of Malaysia was absolutely looted. In the Middle East, they've been very big fans of sovereign wealth funds. And that's why the sovereign wealth fund can buy a yacht, a 100-foot yacht, gold trimmings, but surprisingly only one person gets to use the yacht. There's no say. It's a sovereign wealth fund. They can do whatever they like. And we know how well we manage money in South Africa. So I'm very keen to know who would manage the sovereign wealth fund, what the checks and balances would be. Because, of course, Parliament, it would go to Parliament, somebody would raise the issue saying, hey, we're not working very well with the sovereign wealth fund. And they'll say, no, we think we are. Let's vote. We know where that ends. Okay. Then they're also going to reimpose exchange controls. It's going to be tough. I lived under exchange controls. It doesn't necessarily make the country richer. It may protect us from some of the ravages of poor performance because people aren't allowed to sell. If you're a South African, you're stuck in South Africa. If you make, money in South Africa, you can't take it offshore. So, needless to say, if you've got exchange controls, you're really usually doing that because you can't afford people to make up their own minds. They're going to nationalize all the banks and have a state-owned bank. I'm not sure why the state just doesn't use the banks that are there, but we understand how well the comrades, and especially the people that have been recruited as Umkhonto we sees where officials work with money. So can you imagine if they had your bank's money? You've got savings there. And the bank's run by one of these people that ran Eskom so well. Anyway, that's the idea. Education will be free. The education system must foster national consciousness. I'm not sure what consciousness means in this case. Health policies, they're going to implement the NHI. But they're going to protect the property rights of traditional healthcare practitioners. So you and I may not have property rights, but the traditional healthcare practitioners will have their property protected. Now, on Social Security, we're going to have a basic income grant of 1,558 Rand, oddly specific number. There'll be a child support grant of 760 Rand and an old age pension of 4,500 Rand. There's a magical money tree somewhere where they'll be able to get this money from. And of course, they're going to have homes for the homeless. In fact, housing is going to be solved by starting a state construction company with project management. So perhaps that's what's been missing. But they'll also allow private capital to invest. Now, when you see something like this, everything else has been to kill off private capital. Why would private capital want to invest in a state-owned construction company? But hey, I was quite interested to see that transport will include a state-owned fund to finance the taxi industry. And the state, the South African state, the same lot that can't keep the lights on, will manufacture buses and taxis. Let's think about that for a second. Our state will manufacture buses and taxis. If you think the roads are bad now, stick around. And of course, the state will develop high-speed rail. Now, I like this one. Safety and security will be fostered by closer cooperation between police and crime intelligence. Now, I'm all for that. We've got to use crime intelligence. But remember, Jacob Zuma was the guy that gave us Richard Mdluli as the crime intelligence boss. And he gutted crime intelligence. So if these are the kind of people that are going to run crime intelligence, even if you have the best police force in the world, this doesn't help. Foreign policy will include standing in solidarity with Russia, Cuba, and Palestine, and creating an alternative currency to the dollar. That's going to work well, isn't it? We know that that Donald Trump's quite keen on that, and I can't imagine any leader of the US that'll like that. But we don't need to please the US. But remember, China don't want to trade in any currency other than the dollar. Neither does India. That's why BRICS can't proceed on this, because those countries don't want to trade in their own currencies. They are happy to trade in the dollar. They hold a lot of dollars. So it's going to be interesting. But all of this must be seen in the light of a couple of things, and that is that Jacob Zuma was president for 9 years, where he had a large majority and a sycophantic parliament that would do anything. They protected him at every turn. Which one of these items that I've just gone through was he stopped from doing when he was president? Because we've heard so many times that people just got to get rid of him because he was doing something. I don't know what he was doing. If you've got a whole list of things, why wasn't he doing it when he was president? And if he thinks that the state is so good, how come we had the problems that we had? They weren't invented. They were there, black and white, for everybody to see. It was done in real time and live on television. That's my first question. Second question is, if you're going to do that, then at least have some devoted members, not people that are retreaded people of questionable character. If you wanted confusion, your confusion about MK confirmed, I saw 2 articles almost back to back this week. The first one said, when talking about the deportation of Janusz Walusz, the guy who had assassinated Chris Hani, and they said that Chris Hani once said, "We don't want partnership with capitalists." And MK agreed with him, and that's why he was killed, apparently. Then I saw a next message from the same Mkhonto weSizwe talking about e-tolls and what they would have done differently. They said they would have sought strategic partnerships with private investors, and they would have monetized e-tolls through advertising and having service stations at e-tolls. Now, on the one hand, you don't have partnerships with capitalists. On the other hand, your solution to e-tolls would have been to have brought capital into it. I think that one must be very worried about Mkhonto weSizwe, and I'll tell you why. They have made some big, big promises that are impossible to deliver on. It's impossible. Quite simply, the country doesn't have the money now, and if you go around doing some of the things that they talk about, business will flee in their droves. International investment will dry up, right? China are not looking for worse places to invest in. They're looking for good places to invest in. South Africa is a very small market. Where is the money going to come from? We understand that because we understand money. But a large swathe of voters do not understand how money works. And they are just plucking some of these numbers out, some of these issues out that suit them. And they may just decide that this is a good idea. What worries me, as it worried me with the EFF when they were more popular than what they are now, this idea of expropriating land. The only way it works is if you expropriate everybody's land, not just white people's land, not just farmers. This means that those middle-class black people watching this today, your house goes as well. You also will not be spared. You can't do this any other way. But this message may really land with voters that do not have the understanding of the way systems work, the way countries work, and they could very well get support. I've got to say, Mkhonto weSizwe worries me because these policies, which have been tried so many times by so many failed states, could just resonate with people in their utter desperation. Am I worried about Mkhonto weSizwe? Hell yes. What can we do about it? All we can do is try and explain the ramifications of what they are saying and what they are doing. And keep yourself informed by watching the State of the Nation. So support Pace Car Rental. That's a start. They keep us on air. And subscribe to the State of the Nation. Thank you very much, and we'll see you again on the weekly update on the State of the Nation.